As we've talked about, it'd be fun. The desert it'd be more fun than deserts. The desert is more than just a geographical space. It's an experience. We've talked about this the past few weeks. It's a season where you feel lost and exposed and unsure of the way forward. The desert's unfamiliar. It's challenging. It strips us of comfort and control and forces us to confront things that we would rather avoid. Maybe you've been in that kind of desert season before, when life felt uncertain and where the path forward wasn't clear, where you wrestled with doubts and struggles and maybe even God himself. Some of you know exactly what that feels like. Maybe you're in a season where you're asking God, where are you? Why is this happening to me? What on earth am I supposed to do next? And if you are, or if you've ever been there, I want you to take heart. Because throughout history, God does some of his greatest work in these kinds of desert seasons. Tonight, we're talking about one of the invitations that desert seasons offer to us. This is a little bit of, kind of a hard topic to talk about. It's detachment, as in letting go, releasing the grip, opening the fists, unclenching whatever we're white-knuckling our way through life with. It's not exactly a crowd pleaser topic, right? Many of us hear detachment and we think of monks in like burlap robes drinking lukewarm water from wooden bowls. Not fun. Unless you're into that, and that's fine. Like I'm not throwing judgment at that, but just stay with me for a second, because tonight what we're talking about is not misery, it's freedom. And who doesn't want more of that? Everything we talk about tonight is going to orbit around something Jesus says in Matthew 6:19 through 21. It may sound familiar to you. This is a classic passage, but let's not rush it. Let's try to hear Jesus' words fresh. Jesus said, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Now we hear this, and most of us mentally nod and think, yeah, don't be materialistic. I get it. But then we get home, and we see that Amazon package on our porch, and we get that tiny little shot of dopamine. Or we scroll past someone's new car or their remodeled kitchen or their luxury vacation, and suddenly we feel that weird nagging itch that we're missing something, that our lives aren't quite enough. I think Jesus is certainly pushing on that tendency here in what he's saying, but I also think he's calling us to see something deeper. He's not just talking about physical stuff. He's talking about anything that we cling to that keeps us from trusting God fully. So that could be control, the need to have every detail of your life mapped out. That could be approval, the need for everyone to like you or agree with you and validate your worth. It could be comfort, the unwillingness to step into anything risky or uncertain or uncomfortable. It could be past scars, the grudges and bitterness and pain left behind by things others have done to you or things that you've done but can't seem to forgive yourself for. We all cling to something. What do you find yourself clinging to? In this passage, Jesus is kind enough to say, hey, don't bet your heart on things that are falling apart. Moths and rust destroying, that's slow decay. Thieves stealing, that's a sudden loss. But either way, if our hearts are tied to what's temporary, we're always one tragedy or one downturn or one identity crisis away from crumbling. Jesus isn't trying to guilt trip us here. He's trying to free us from the cycle of clinging to things that cannot possibly hold up. One guy that took these words to heart, one of the original minimalists, you could call him, is a guy named Abba Serapion. He was one of the desert fathers and mothers that we've been talking about throughout the series, those early Christian monks who got so fed up with the noise and distractions and corruption of the Roman imperial society that they decided to do something drastic. They left the cities and moved into caves and huts deep in the Egyptian wilderness. This wasn't a gimmick or a shtick. They weren't doing it for attention or followers. It's not like today, they weren't filming themselves and saying, like and subscribe to follow my journey on this weird thing that I'm doing. They did it because they believed that apart from the noise and distractions, they could hear God more clearly. One of their primary values, maybe the defining value, was detachment, letting go of everything that draws us away from God. Again, not because they hated the world, but because they wanted to be free. Free from what the world says gives them value. Free from ego and excess and anything that pulled them away from the presence of God. And one day, this young man, whose name we don't know, probably wide-eyed and eager, goes to Abba Serapion and says, Abba, give me a word. Meaning, give me some wisdom. Guide me, help me go deeper. In these places, if you showed up to the desert as a new seeker, it was very normal for you to go visit a seasoned spiritual mentor and ask for some wisdom. But Serapion doesn't give him a comforting word. What the young man finds is a confrontation. Serapion looks around the young man's cell, which is what they called the places that they lived. They weren't in jails, which is kind of confusing. This would have been like a hut or cave or shack, very humble living situations. Anyway, he looks around where this young man lives, and he doesn't see rugs or treasures or elaborate furniture, but he does notice something that carried a different kind of weight: books. Shelves stacked with books. And Serapion says, what can I say to you? You have taken the living of the widows and orphans and put it on your shelves. That's intense. And it sounds really harsh and odd to us today. Because we think, what? It's books. What's wrong with books? How is having books stealing from orphans and widows? But you have to remember, this is sometime in the 4th century. This is early 300s AD. Books are luxury items. There's no printing press yet. That wouldn't be invented for over 1,000 years. Every book had to be hand-copied meticulously by trained scribes. The materials alone, the parchment or papyrus, weren't cheap. And because literacy was so rare, books were both expensive and a status symbol. Think of them as the Rolexes or the Dyson hair dryers of the ancient world. Books were the avocado toast of the 4th century. So when Serapion walks into this room, this man's sparse desert cell, and notices shelves lined with costly books, he sees a contradiction. You've come out here to get away from all the noise and distractions of the world to hear from God, but you have dragged the world along with you. He's not rebuking reading, he's not rebuking learning or anything like that. He's rebuking the man's attachments to luxury and status, to appearing impressive, and the affirmation that comes with it. I think this is an important idea because sometimes we hide our attachments behind good things. We tell ourselves, this is for my growth. But Serapion would say, maybe, but is it keeping you from generosity? Is it turning your eyes inward when they should be looking outward? This desert father was not trying to humiliate this man. He was trying to wake him up. He's saying, how do you expect to grow out here when you're still clinging to what makes you valuable in the eyes of the world? Which, I don't know about you, that feels very relatable to me. Like, we want spiritual clarity, but we don't want to turn down the volume of everything else in our lives. We want peace, but we want to keep the clutter. We want freedom, but we keep dragging our chains along with us, just in case. This is what detachment addresses. It's not about punishing yourself. It's about recognizing that you can't receive what's life-giving if your hands are already full of what's not. So let me ask you, what are you clinging to? And I don't mean in some vague, abstract sense. I mean practically in your actual life. What's the thing that if God asked you to give it up, you would quietly whisper anything but that? We all have at least something. For some of us, maybe that is a possession, that car, that home, that avocado toast, that thing that we worked hard for and finally got, and now the thought of losing it causes instant anxiety. For some, it's security, right? The need to always have a plan, the need to have savings, a savings account padded, the career ladder laid out in front of us, the worst case scenario managed before it even happens. You tell yourself you're not a pessimist, you just like to be prepared. right? I cling to security a lot. That one's very hard for me. For others, it's relationships, right? Like you hold on tightly to the opinions and approval of people who don't know the real you. You curate yourself, you shape shift, you wear masks because the risk of being rejected just feels too big. For many of us, we're clinging to an identity, a role, a version of ourselves that we built over the years, and letting go of that feels like dying. Why? Why might letting go of our false selves feel that way? Why might we have anxiety around letting go of things that we're clinging to? The answer is because we're afraid. We don't cling to these things because we're greedy. We cling to them because we're scared. Fear is at the root. We fear being without. We fear not having enough. We fear being forgotten or overlooked or irrelevant. We fear we'll let go of this thing and we'll lose ourselves. But this is exactly what Jesus was getting at in our passage from Matthew when he says, store up treasures in heaven. He's not talking about stacking up spiritual credit for some future afterlife. He's talking about freedom right now. He's saying, put your trust where it can't be stolen. Put your hope where it won't rot. And maybe that sounds overly spiritual to you, like a churchy metaphor type thing, but just think about it in real life terms. What are the things that you pour your energy into that keep leaving you empty? What are you chasing that never actually satisfies? Jesus is naming that cycle. Treasures in heaven aren't about some abstract reward that we'll get someday, right? They're about who we become here and now when we stop clinging to what can't last. Jesus is inviting us to let go of fear-based, anxious attachments and re-anchor our hearts into something eternal, something secure, something that cannot be shaken. So, I'll ask you again, what are you clinging to? What's the one thing that God might be gently, persistently inviting you to surrender? Not to punish you, not to shame you, but to free you by letting go of what keeps you in chains. I think desert seasons have this beautiful and simultaneously brutal way of showing us what we really value. In any challenging season or time of suffering, things get quiet, right? Distractions disappear, and all the stuff that we normally use to avoid our inner junk goes away. That's when the idols in our hearts get exposed. That's when our unhealthy attachments rise to the surface. But there's good news in that too. God's not disgusted or disheartened by your idols or attachments. He's not shocked that you're clinging to things so tightly. He just wants to help you let go. He wants to help lead you to healthy detachment from what you're clinging to, away from these things that are decaying your soul. So, how do we begin to actually do this? How do we begin to detach? How do we practice letting go? There's many ways to do this, but I want to give you just a few ideas tonight. The first is really practical. Give something away. Not junk, something that means something to you. A possession, some money, some time. Let it be sacrificial. That's where transformation can begin. It's finally springtime, and many of us will begin cleaning out our physical spaces, and it's a great opportunity to give sacrificially. We actually have an opportunity to do this together to bless others. Starting from now until the end of April, we are doing a spring clothing drive to help our friends at Christ Body Ministries, which is a homeless day shelter and church downtown, stock back up on their clothing supply. It is something that they always, always need. So from now until that date, you can bring any clothes that you are getting rid of that are in good shape. We'll keep them here, and then on the 29th, similar to how we made Thanksgiving meals together, we're going to, instead of a normal service, going to get all of the clothes that we've collected out and sort them and store them so that we can just hand them to Christ's body, and they can get them to people in need who need them. So that's a great opportunity. But whether it's our clothing drive or you're just decluttering in general because it's spring, look for what you can give away to others. Pay attention to what emotions come up for you. What do you keep? What do you struggle to part with? And let it teach you. And this isn't like a one and done thing where like you can give something away and check off that box and say, there, done, I'm detached. But it can be the beginning of your path down that road. So first is give something away. The second thing is take a break from a convenience. Pick something that makes life easier or more numbed out and step away from it. This could be your phone. This could be fast food. This could be Amazon Prime. This could be avoiding hard conversations. Intentionally put yourself in a less convenient situation. The third thing is serve without being seen. Detach your need for credit. Detach from your need for credit. Do something meaningful that no one will ever applaud you for. There's a lot of different ways that could look. And finally, practice gratitude. This is something that I talk about a lot. It comes up over and over and over again. There are few things that counter fear and anxiety-based attachments more than gratitude. Gratitude for the many blessings that we have in our lives. Be grateful for the provisions and the relationships and the experiences that God has blessed you with. Here's just a something for you to think through this week, a challenge for you this week. It's simple, but it's not easy. What is one thing that God might be asking you to let go of? Not 10, not everything, just one. Again, maybe it is a possession. Maybe it's an outcome that you're obsessed with controlling. Maybe it's the version of yourself that you're trying desperately to prove is lovable. Maybe it's the idea of the life that you thought you'd be living by now. Or one of the many other things we've talked about tonight. Whatever it is, open your hands. Let God hold it. That's where the real growth can happen. Not in the clinging, but in the releasing. Jesus wraps up this little section of Matthew that we've been talking about with a mic drop. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You want to know what you really love? Check your treasure. Check what you hold to tightest. Check what you're terrified to lose. Loosen your grip and do not be afraid. God isn't trying to shame us. God isn't trying to punish us. He's trying to free us. Because when we treasure him above all, our hearts find peace. Would you pray with me? God, there's so many things in our lives that seep their ways into our hearts that become so important. So many things that we tend to tie our value and sense of worth to apart from you. God, I pray that we would become a community of people that is more and more detached in the healthiest way. That we would be people grateful for the things that you have given us and the people that you have put in our lives and the experiences that we get to have, but that those things don't define who we are or the value that we see in ourselves or others. God, I pray that you would tug at each one of our hearts this week and point out something that we could loosen our grip on to make more space to hear your voice. We love you, God. It's in your name we pray.